Assumptions, part two. But before I begin, I want to make a correction to something I said in the first part about assumptions. I mentioned the word idiot as something, as a word that everyone should look up and see what its origins are. Well, I went and looked it up to see what its origins are afterwards and found it wasn't quite what had thought it was. I swear, at some point I looked it up and found a different meaning. But anyway, the origin of idiot is still has nothing to do with the uh, current usage of the word, but uh, it's interesting in that it's not a bad meaning. It hasn't taken on the connotations that the word idiot has in the modern world. Uh, so that last discussion was a little allegorical story about a wolf in the land of short trees. So uh, he didn't have a name. I'm not giving him a name because, well, dogs don't. Well, back up. What do you say? Cut. Stop. Start again. Roll them. Action. I could give the dog a name. The dog. The wolf. Jesus. Cut. Oh, keep it rolling. Action. The wolf did not have a name uh, because wolves don't give each other names, but we could call it the big bad wolf, but he wasn't particularly a bad wolf, so I just won't give him a name. And as I said, wolves don't give each other names, dogs don't give each other names because they can't talk and they can't spell. But dogs do know each other and they have a way of designating each other, and that is by smell. Uh, every dog has a unique smell, and uh, that smell on a dog or a wolf, at least I'm sure on a dog, probably on a wolf, is blazoned across their behind. That's why when you see dogs that have never met before sniffing back there, they're saying, "What's your name? What's your name? What's your name?" And if it's another dog that they already know, it's more like, "How you doing? How you doing?" So, yeah, but I digress. Uh, Now, bad assumptions, good assumptions, all comes down to information and how we use information. Uh, I remember someone saying, information is everything, and it certainly is important. So when we make an assumption and then live by that assumption because we've taken it for granted, we what we do basically is we have our assumption that is part of our, as I said, library last time, and we are encountered with something in the world. So we will take those observations and take our library of assumptions and find which assumption applies to those observations and apply some logic which our brains are really good at, and come up with a conclusion based on those assumptions and the new information, the new observations we've made, and then come to a conclusion and then take action based on that conclusion. In the case of that wolf and that particular assumption about pigeons being the food source, they would take actions based on their conclusions. And let's say in the case of a good assumption, the conclusions, because the assumption is good, still valid, and the information they get is real, and the observations they get are real, and the logic they're using is flawless. It's perfect because it's their good old amazing brain doing it. And wolves do have amazing brains, not quite as amazing as ours, but wolves and dogs are pretty amazing. So all that good logic, good assumption, and real observations, because they're doing it with their own senses. They're not depending on what someone else said, what another wolf said. They're not depending on others for it. I'll take all those good things and you come up to a good conclusion. And then you take actions based on that conclusion, and you're likely to be successful because those assumptions you started with have been well honed and improved and modified as needed to make your actions as successful as possible. And in the case of that wolf, in catching pigeons. Okay, let's say it's a bad assumption that you're starting with. And because, well, in the case of that wolf, the pigeons have all gone and you're trying to hunt a different prey, but you are still using that old assumption about pigeons. So bad assumption in general terms, bad assumption, new information, new observations, and perfectly good logic. You come up with conclusions that, because they're based on a bad assumption, your conclusions are bad. Even though you've applied great logic to it, your assumptions are bad. And your acts may not always be the worst, but they're not going to be the best because you are working under bad assumptions. And again, in the case of our wolf with the distinct odor behind him from the land of short trees, with that wolf, his bad assumption was when still applied under the conditions that occurred in my last segment, that bad assumption, new observation, which is rabbits instead of pigeons around. So there are no more pigeons to hunt. There are these new things, these rabbits. So new information, perfectly good logic applied to that information based on that bad assumption. No, not questioning that bad assumption at all. Just going by that bad assumption, using perfectly good logic. He came up to a conclusion that he's going to hunt those rabbits instead of pigeons. And so his first actions in the story are to try and hunt rabbits as if they were pigeons. And he had no luck that way. But this brings up something really, really important about bad assumptions. And two people, we're talking about people now, who have different assumptions they're operating under, can take the same observations, the same information, and come to completely and apply perfectly good logic, can come to completely different conclusions and act in different manners. And usually if they have differing assumptions about the same stuff, at least one of them is making a bad assumption, possibly both of them, but at least one of them is making a bad assumption. So they're taking bad assumptions, good observations, perfect logic, and coming up with perfectly bad conclusions, and then actions based on those perfectly bad conclusions that may not be perfectly bad, but they're not the best. And we as people, as a species, as individuals, and this is a big problem. We have so much belief in, we take for granted these assumptions we're living under and use this perfect logic. So we are so much in belief of what our conclusions are. Because our logic was flawless, our brains are doing it really well, have so much faith in what their conclusions are that they know, they think they know this is right. This is the truth. And that's how two people with differing sets of assumptions can come up with very discordant beliefs, discordant actions. So I guess that's the lesson for today, is you got to start thinking about your assumptions and maybe ask yourself, are the assumptions I'm operating under all good, all bad? And for all of us, it's probably a mix. But I think that discordance is is causing so much trouble in our species. And the problem, as I said, trying to look at your assumptions, what's good, what's bad, is that a lot of, well, let's say some of our assumptions are based on what we learned from other people. Those assumptions didn't begin with us. We were taught them. Our ancestors used those same assumptions. And some of the bad assumptions have been going on for a long time. So it's tough to get back to the assumption, even to know what it is, and certainly not to know where it came from if it's that old. It's difficult, but not impossible. So stay tuned. Thanks.